Welcome to 6 Brutal Tales of Dogman, where you will hear the most terrifying and bizarre recent Dogman reports that we've received from you, our viewers. Starting us off today is this all-new, never-before-heard Dogman experience that we're gonna call Dogman Dogfight. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a Dogman story for you that has no beginning or end, but has a whole lot of violence. Actually, come to think of it, it does have an ending, and a pretty decent one too. It's just that it's one that came many years afterward. Okay, when this started, I was with my then girlfriend Barbara back in the early 1970s. We were riding our bikes on Belle Isle, which is an island considered part of Detroit. It's just as close to Canada as it is to Michigan, though. Detroit is further north than some people realize. We were passing over a little bridge, which I think is this one by the Blue Heron Lagoon, although I don't recall it looking like this back then. About where that little wooden pier appears in this image, that's where we first saw the two very large humanoid forms, one running from the other, as they both attempted occasional jabs, kicks, and pokes at each other. They were running toward the road that we were cycling on, and so Barbara and I both stopped pedaling to watch this crazy scene. As the lighter colored and slightly shorter one made it to the road, looking back over its shoulder and whining like a scared puppy, we could both see that this was a two-legged upright walking dog, colored tan, like a German Shepherd sort of, but lighter and not exactly the same. It was 6, maybe 6.5 feet tall, and it was buff. I mean, it looked like it spent a lot of money at the gym, or else it looked like it just served a 20-year jail sentence. This was the most humanoid-looking non-human I ever saw, until I watched this guy get tackled from behind by the even larger dog that was chasing him. This second larger one had black fur, the darkest black fur I'd ever seen on any animal, other than a panther. I noticed its eyes glowing out of that darkness, and only later I noticed that the tan dog's eyes glowed as well. These were not men, and yet they were not exactly dogs either. They did not look like werewolves such as you see in horror films, or at least not the horror films that we had back in those days. These creatures that were fighting had heads that were in no way human. If you only had seen their faces, you would say these are dogs, maybe wild dogs or primitive dogs, but still dogs. As your eyes tilted down, though, you'd see broad shoulders like a man would have. You'd see defined muscle on chest and torso. You'd see his black fur shining in the waning sun of the day. And you'd wonder how a wild beast man could stay that well-groomed. Because as much as this thing was an animal, it also seemed to be some kind of a human being as well. Okay, that was going too far. I don't mean human exactly, but it was a man, if that makes any sense. It seemed as sophisticated as a human being was, and since this terrified tan-colored one seemed to be of the same species as the darker one, then we were quite possibly witnessing two sentient conscious beings being absolutely horrible to each other. The creatures ran down the road in front of us, which did not look anything like what we're seeing here on this street view. None of this on the left looks familiar to me, but the water's the same obviously on the right. I'm not remembering the fence on the left. I remember that the creatures chased each other into the natural area, whatever that's called down there, if it's still there. Maybe it isn't. The two of them charged down the road, and we followed behind on our bikes at what we hoped was a safe distance. Here we go. This building here is the Belle Isle Nature Center. We saw the two dog-headed ape men run down one of the paths over here, and we followed on our bicycles. They ran past the buildings, and we rode past behind the monsters. Soon we found ourselves off the paved road and under tree cover, where those two big dogmen began absolutely pounding on each other like it was the Thriller in Manila. Oh, one thing about how the dogmen fought each other. I've heard you say on your show that they claw at each other, and they bite as well. I did see them resort to those behaviors, but it was when one had the other in a clinch, and so the biting or scratching was done to break things up. Generally, I saw them wrestle each other to the ground. I saw them ram each other with their shoulders. I saw them pound on each other with fists, as their paws were large and humanoid enough to ball up, sort of how we do it. They did not punch by firing their knuckles into the other guy's nose, however. They pounded the sides of their paws or hands into each other instead, the way one might knock loudly on a door, for example. Only when one or the other got scared and panicked did I see them resort to biting and scratching, and even then, they only did it long enough to get away. That might suggest that this was a turf battle, and maybe both of them survived. Maybe neither one was hurt badly, because this might have been a status competition more than a fight to the finish. The argument against that, though, was that the tan-colored one seemed to be exhibiting submissive behavior, as though he were repeatedly attempting to give up and accept that he had lost the fight. The darker-furred one, though, he wasn't having any of that. He seemed to want to pound on that tan pooch man for the rest of all time. So my interpretation was that the dark one wanted revenge for some reason, while the tan one didn't want to fight at all. We turned around suddenly, too scared to be where we were. Something about the darkness and the dank coldness of the area under the tree cover made what was happening 10 times more upsetting to be near. We no longer cared that we'd never get to see anything like this again. We only cared that we lived to tell the tale. So, we turned our bikes around, and there were 3 dogmen behind us. Fascinated not with us, but with the fight happening past us in the woods. My girlfriend Barbara nudged me and motioned around. There were tan and red dog-headed people on one side, and they were harder to see dark, upright walking canine men on the other, and behind us. We were surrounded, so we ducked down behind our bicycles, listening to the fight and the frantic whining reactions from those in the crowd. Whoever those 2 were that were fighting, the outcome of their battle seemed as though it was going to have important consequences for everyone who was gathered around. Were these 2 different dogman tribes warring? Or was this a fight for dominance and leadership of just one larger tribe? There was a sound like a car backfiring not far away. It might also have been a firearm, although I would doubt they're legal over there on Belle Island. Maybe they were back then. I guess they might have been. In any case, the explosive sound caused the 2 battling dogmen to run off deeper into the woods, and for their Madison Square Garden audience to get up and go trailing after them, not wanting to miss any of the action. That allowed me and Barbara to get our butts out of there and back to civilization. So, as I said in the beginning, the story didn't really have a conclusion for years, but it does now. Back around 7 years ago, I guess, like between 2014 to 2016, in that range of years, I got contacted by Barbara through Facebook. She's married now, but she still lives in the Detroit area, while I already had not for some time. She told me that she and her husband went bike riding, same as she and I had done years back over on Belle Isle. She was still in good shape back then. She was exercising a lot in those days, although we lost her in 2020. So, Barbara told me that she didn't see it herself, but her husband told her after they got home that he saw a family of dogmen in the park. Barb thought he was joking around, but she had never told him about my sighting with her so long ago. So, she was looking at him with wild eyes, wondering if he was pulling her leg. and she asked him why he didn't point out the Dogman to her while he was still seeing them. He said he didn't want to frighten her, so he didn't tell her until they were all the way home. So she asked him to describe the monsters. He said the leader of them was a tall, upright walking Dogman with very, very dark fur and very bright, shining eyes. He was leading 3 or 4 smaller, upright canines through the bush at the edge of the woods. Those smaller Dogmen were a mix of tan ones and dark ones, but they appeared to be some form of clan or family. So Barbara asked me if I had told her husband about our sighting. Now, I didn't even like her husband before he was her husband. I would only talk to him if I absolutely had to. I resent that he got to marry Barbara. I mean, love comes and goes, but deep, bitter resentments are forever. She still hadn't told him about the experience that we had. And so then God punished her. And her punishment was that her own husband didn't tell her about a Dogman experience that she literally had with him. So anyway, the happy part is I guess that Dogman clan we saw warring back in the early 70s managed to work it out and stick together. Although fighting should always be the very last resort in any situation, sometimes it's the only way to achieve a greater and longer lasting peace. And I hope that this was the case for those canine-headed upright creatures after they waged the Dogman dogfight. So many people will be spending this winter sitting alone in the cold, trying to piece their lives back together. But not you. You can be spending the winter piecing Dogman back together with this fantastic new Dogman Prison Breakout Jigsaw Puzzle. 500 little confusing, frustrating pieces of cardboard fun. It's the Dogman Prison Breakout Jigsaw Puzzle, and it could be making its way to you via special delivery if you click on the link available somewhere in the description. This first story today was brought to you by Josh Bobbin. Maybe tomorrow's episode will be brought to the public by you. We can't survive without our PayPal club and channel members, and if you want to become one of them, go to the very end of this episode where Henry Lee Dogman will explain most or all of the many ways you can help keep us making new shows for you, hopefully into the new year if the stars align. But we've got 5 more stories before Henry has his say. So let's jump straight into our second one, which we call Bear Mountain Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've heard you talk about Whitehall, New York on your show, and how they're known for legalizing Bigfoot and Sasquatch, or decriminalizing them, or however the law works. I want to write to you about a different large-size animal man that I saw with my cousins back in the early 1970s. We saw it north of the Bronx, but since I was young and along for the ride, I'm not certain exactly where we were when we had our experience. I know it was not by Whitehall. It was either at Bear Mountain or maybe on the way to it that we went through what we went through. And the creature we almost got eaten by looked more to me like a werewolf than it did an ape of any sort. So at least back in the 20th century, there was a werewolf or upright canine presence in those ancient woods north of the city. My nephew has been telling me about the Dogman lately, and I was a bit surprised when he described the creature to me. Now the rest of our family thinks I'm making up these old Dogman stories to entertain my nephew, who I will call Pablo. No, I just never told him to that side of the family before, because I didn't see what gain there would be in it. Pablo and I finally have our own subject to discuss, so I'm glad I brought these old stories out of the mothballs. But that doesn't mean I created them out of desperation to get a relative to like me. In fact, I'm kind of insulted at the accusation. At any rate, I grew up in a giant urban apartment building with more tenants than some U.S. cities. It always smelled of either urine or the ammonia they used to clean up the urine, one or the other. Usually over a crowded elevator heading up to the higher floor that my family lived on, reminded me of stories about poor families coming to America from overseas, packed down in the darker parts of the ship in the hold. The further we went up into the sky, the more I felt like I was descending into hell. So, how did I meet the Dogman? Well, I had cousins back when I was a kid who lived in what my parents called the suburbs and what I called the country. In actuality, they lived in a little 2-story home in the Bronx with a small backyard, surrounded by other similar but not quite the same home situations in all directions. It was not a rich area, but there were no empty homes, no run-down ones either. The backyards were filled with trees and bushes and vines and gardens, and compared to the huge apartment building / city in the hell sky that my family lived in, my cousins lived in heaven itself. They even had an above-ground pool that their father would put up each year, but only once it had been over 80 degrees for a full week first. At any rate, it was with those cousins and that uncle, who I will call Uncle Lionel, that I saw the one and only cryptid creature that I've ever seen. I saw a Dogman, and I can say without the slightest bit of doubt that Dogman saw all of us, too. But hang on, I'm still getting to that. I remember one time we were playing in my cousin's backyard in the Bronx, and suddenly we could hear weird sounds coming from somewhere behind their house. It sounded scary, but it also sounded familiar. Then I realized it was the original 1970s Creature Features theme. At least that's what I thought it was. The high-pitched part that I could hear best was the theremin, that really spooky sound from old scary movies. I asked the other guys if they heard it too, and after being quiet for a while, they could. It made us laugh and it made us feel nervous all at once, because although it was Saturday, it wasn't time for Creature Features yet. That didn't come on till the sun was down. Logically, if we were hearing that theme in that part of that suburban neighborhood at that time of the day, back in the early 1970s, then we were hearing something that someone recorded off of their TV, most likely onto a handheld old-school audio cassette recorder. I asked my cousins if any kids or teenagers lived behind them, and they said nope, there's only a bunch of grown-ups. That kind of gave me a shiver too. It might sound funny or ironic to say it now, but when I was a kid, I was sort of weirded out by adults who were into things like science fiction or comic books or whatever. There just weren't as many people in their 20s or older that were into the stuff I liked. And when they were, it was often for different reasons than why I liked it, and we had nothing to talk about anyway. Now I'm technically an adult, and I like the same juvenile stuff that I always used to like, rewatching the same movies as they come out on VHS, then DVD, then Blu-ray, then whatever new format that I've just got to see it on. Oh, and then I've got to buy the streaming version even though they can delete it from their end anytime they feel like it. They actually consider people like me to be officially adults now, and I haven't really been forced to grow out of any of this yet. So we were hearing the strange music from the Creature Features TV show, played at the wrong time of the day, and this was before VCRs. Plus, we couldn't tell which house the sound was coming from. Someone in that neighborhood had gone through the trouble of recording that freaky instrumental theme, and was playing it at just before sunset, a little before dinner time. If you want to imagine what we were hearing, hopefully the owner of this channel has included a link to the music somewhere in the info or the comments of this video. If not, then search for the WNEW Creature Features Channel 5 New York theme music on YouTube. It's also known in its original context as the theme from the movie It Came from Outer Space, specifically called Visitors from Space. You should be able to find it somewhere. Now imagine you're in your cousin's backyard in the Bronx in the early 70s, and you're hearing that theme from somewhere out in the darkness. Maybe it was the young son of Sam working out his entrance music or something. One of the things I found scary about it was that I couldn't tell which of those houses it was coming from. It could have been coming from any of the three of them. I decided to be respectful of that odd ability that sound can sometimes have of hiding its direction. I don't know how or why it happens, but I know that sometimes it does. Another example from much later in my life. Someone showed me that there's a secret spy pillar built into Grand Central Station. Well, 2 of them actually. This person had me stand by one pillar and listen. Then, she walked across the way to another pillar that was fairly distant to me. Suddenly I could hear her whispering in my ear. That proves not only that such a thing can happen, that we can think we're hearing things coming from one place that are really from another, but also that architects have seemingly always known about such tricks. And who knows how many other tricks. Just how many secrets do you think these old school hierarchies are keeping for themselves? What other stuff have we not been told about? And the other thing is, what animals are naturally able to perceive this sort of a thing? Okay, so yeah, me and those same cousins and that same Uncle Lionel, we went camping up north at Bear Mountain. On the way there, we were joking around that Bear Mountain was really named after a Bigfoot, and then we were joking that it was really named after a Dogman. Uncle Lionel said we were all crazy. Obviously, he informed us, it was named after a bear. If they meant to name it after a Bigfoot, then it would be called Harry and the Hendersons Mountain. Uncle Lionel may not have been a great comedian, but he always made sure everyone felt included and part of the family. So I really honestly don't remember how we got lost or where we got lost, but we hadn't checked into where we were supposed to camp, and basically everyone needed to go to the bathroom. It was dark out. We didn't know where we should be, but we knew that it wasn't where we were, and we could see it getting darker and darker. We started insisting that Uncle Lionel pull over and allow us to relieve ourselves in the woods alongside the road. Uncle Lionel was completely against it at first, but then I reminded him that if we had gotten to where we were supposed to go, we'd be camping in a tent in the woods, and if we had to go, we would just go on a tree. That part was agreed to. Then I asked him what the difference was if the tree was alongside the tent or the highway. He had no response, plus he needed to go too, so he pulled over next chance he could, and we all sprang out. Now, Uncle Lionel just had some bad luck sometimes, and this was one of those times. I could see the blood trail on the grass even as I ran into the darkness to find my personal tree to relieve myself against. Someone or something had dragged its prey into these woods. Even at that age, I could recognize that this is what I had seen. I also had no option but to finish what I was doing, which is what I focused all my attention on in that particular second. And then the weird sounds began. I thought I heard someone call my name, and then I heard my cousin's name called from a completely different direction. My very first thought was the theremin music in the Bronx. I heard Lionel's name being called from a third direction. Were we surrounded by people who somehow knew our names? Or was something far stranger about to happen? Well, the screaming started before I could finish my business, and I knew the general reason why I was hearing it. That predator, the one that dragged the body into the woods. Someone had found him, or maybe they found his prey. At the top of my lungs I shouted, "Get back to the car!" as I myself started running back. I was holding my pants up. There hadn't been time to close them properly. I reached the vehicle first, then banged my head hard as I got in. Everything felt like I was spinning for a while, but I managed to get the door shut behind me. I saw an animal that was not like any other animal I've ever even heard of. It looked more like a werewolf than anything real. It stood up on its hind legs so tall that it couldn't have been a man in a costume. This was like some kind of prehistoric monster from a movie. This was not something you'd expect to find in upstate New York. I saw my Uncle Lionel running back to the car, his eyes open so wide I thought his skull was going to pop out of one of them eye sockets. My cousins were screaming loud, like a lady in an opera. I was expecting the car windows to crack, you know? So everybody got in the car, and I looked over at that dogman or werewolf thing over there. He was standing, sniffing around, sort of looking confused. The thing was so tall, taller than any bear I've ever seen in my life. Like taller than a polar bear, but with a coat of fur that had shades from dark gray to light silver. He was displaying, I think they call it. He was growling and barking and acting all macho to get us to leave. Uncle Lionel and that car were both a little nervous about getting back on the road, but eventually we did make it. As we drove away from the Silver Dogman, we started praying that we were going in the correct direction. 'Cause if we weren't, that meant we were going to have to turn around and try once again to get past the Bear Mountain Dogman. Now, we don't always have a handy opportunity to thank today's executive producer, Jim Mooney. You know what I'm saying? What I'm saying is that in this crazy world that we live in today, it's getting harder and harder to survive. And that's why we depend more and more and more and more and more on badass dudes like Jim Mooney. In return, Jim Mooney gets cool perks. One of the most vulnerable times of everyone's life is our young adulthood, and that's why it's especially frightening when something like the Dogman takes an interest in a young person, such as in this next tale that we call The Peeping Dogman, a Midwest Dogman story. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was a kid, and we're talking some time back in the 1970s, I used to sleep in the basement of our family's house. For a while it was great, but then this really weird dog started hanging around our basement window and paying too much attention to me while I tried to sleep at night. It took me a pretty long time before I figured out that this was actually a dogman outside my window. Supposedly we had lived in several apartments first, but the only place I remember living when I was very young was this house we rented from a great uncle who I don't think I ever met. It was on the poor side of town, but within walking distance of a couple of supermarkets. The side and the back were right up against an untamed bit of woodland, which we weren't allowed to go in without our mother or some other guardian. My father at the time was a traveling something or other, and we usually only saw him 3 or 4 times a year. Mom seemed happier when he was around, but me and my sister often got left with neighbors or relatives during those periods, so I never really liked it when he would deign to visit us, and I never really got to know him that well in those days. The only time I remember him showing up for one of my birthdays, he made a big deal that my sister and I shouldn't be sharing the basement any longer. I think I had turned 11 and she was 8 or 9. My father, who was almost never there, told my mother to move her bedroom and my sister's up to the top floor and let me have the basement as my own apartment. This way, he announced, I would be able to practice learning how to be a man. That was the way he put it. The only thing he taught me about how to be a man was how to stay on the road away from your family as much as possible. At any rate, he was the reason I was completely alone in the basement when that strange dog creature started coming around and staring in the window at me. At first, I thought it was a dog, as in, just a regular dog. I started noticing weird things about it, though. The front legs were not regular dog legs, for one thing. They were sort of more like human arms, to be honest. It would kind of do push-ups with its face in the window, and it would need to get really low to the ground to look in at me. See, the bottom of that window on the outside was flush with the ground, or maybe an inch above it. I think it used to be like 5 or 6 inches above the ground when the place was first built, but by the time we were there, the house had settled and the land had built up a bit. So there was a really big canine, basically lying on its belly, peeping in at me as I slept. Although the window was right on ground level on the outside, it was right up near the ceiling when I was inside the room. I would have to look up to look out of it. I'm not talking about a conventionally shaped window either. This was a wider than tall window, sort of shaped like a modern computer or TV screen, but not very large. It was maybe 1 foot tall by 14 or 16 inches wide, you know. When the dog got up close, its face could fill that entire window, and then some. In my memory, the window was something like 10 feet off the ground, but everything is larger in our childhood memories. I remember my mother complaining that she never liked to put curtains on that window, because she'd have to go get the step stool just to reach up there, so it was definitely high off the floor. I'm sure it wasn't 10 feet, but maybe it was 7 feet. I don't know, 6.5 to 7.5 feet. I'm not really sure, but since it looked out on the forest, and no people ever walked over there that we knew of, it had never become a priority to put a curtain or shades up in that tiny little window. It didn't even slide up or down. The only thing you could do with it was sort of pull the top part in and push the bottom part out a little. It was made to tilt on its central axis, so you could let in some air into the basement without creating a large enough opening for a burglar to crawl into. Sometimes that big dog would stick its giant nose right up into the tiny opening and snuffle and wuzzle up there like an asthmatic, trying to catch the different odors going on inside my basement room. I had 2 ways I could see the creature when it was at the window. I could see a reflection of it in a mirror when I was lying in a certain position in bed. And I could also go and stand across the room from it on top of the lazy boy recliner. I could see it pretty directly from there. Sometimes we would stare at each other for a while until I would either get sleepy and go to bed, or the dog would apparently just have had enough and get up and run off suddenly. When it stood up, I could briefly see its torso and chest, which were more humanoid than a dog's chest usually looked to me. It also had these pimples, but the pimples were evenly spaced. It looked like aliens had placed a grid over its belly to make the pimples appear in a grid. Then one day we were visiting a family friend, and their old female Labrador came over for pets. At one point she got excited and stood up, and I noticed that she also had that grid of pimples on her underside, like 2 rows of 5 of them, from the chest down to pretty far below. I asked the lady and my mom about the dog's pimple grid, and they thought that was extremely funny. Those weren't pimples on a grid, those were nipples. It was the way a mommy dog fed her baby dogs. Those nipples used to give milk when this dog was younger. So I was being stalked by a large female dog of some kind. It struck me like a bolt of lightning. The canine I had been seeing was so large that the idea it might have been female just never occurred to me. For some reason, this made everything far worse in my mind, although I couldn't really explain to myself why. I badgered my mother to get a curtain or covering for the window, and I climbed up there to place hardcover books in front of it in the meantime. I didn't want anything looking in that window any longer, but even more than that, I didn't want to be able to look out from there either. Well, I know I was hoping that was going to be the end of this female Dogman story. I really had hoped to get out of it without ever having to admit the truth of it to anyone. I wanted to know I had survived the ordeal without ever having had to tell anyone what I had been having to deal with. My family was not rich, but I knew my mother would find a way to pay for me to see a shrink if it got out that I was seeing werewolves and monsters staring in at me at night. I knew that my schoolmates would hear about it too. I knew that my life would become a living hell if one single word got out to any person that I was being stalked by a big, hairy, fang-faced female dogman. I wanted it to go away, and yet it did the opposite, at least for a little while. At first, after covering my window over, wherever I went, I would see that grid pattern, her doggy nipples. I would see them and then realized she was standing in the woods and spying on me. As soon as I turned my head to focus on her, she'd race behind a rock or a tree. One time I was even in a public park, and I thought I caught sight of the Dogman mother out of the corner of my eye. That time disturbed me greatly. Either it meant that the Dogman woman was now willing to venture into human settlements just to get close to me, or it demonstrated that I was becoming so stressed out that I was beginning to imagine things. In either case, that one really made me want to give up. I felt so sad, and I wished I had someone to share my misery with. But then, my father called for us. He had gotten us a smaller house but in a nicer area, and we moved eastward, out of the Midwest entirely. Sometimes I think back on that giant female Dogman, her eyes glowing as she stared into my bedroom at night. She was the first woman that ever obsessed over me, even if she really was thinking of me as a midnight snack in reality. She kinda helped shape my fear of predatory women. And trust me, there are a lot of those out here in the East. I mean, it might sound pretty crazy to say, but I think I learned a lot about the female gender through my early experiences with the peeping Dogman. Ladies, are you having trouble getting people to respect your right of way while jogging? Perhaps your sports bra just isn't vicious enough. Try wearing this new vicious Dogman sports bra and watch all the pedestrians rush to get out of your way while you jog. You'll be queen of the road in your all new vicious Dogman sports bra, the link to which is in the description of this very video. Use discount code SEPT2022 in order to get 20% discount of your purchase between now and October 1st. We would like to honor and thank Valerie Gomez, aka Nicole Gomez, for her recent super thanks to us with the following limerick. Thank you for your kind donation to aid us in our recreation of Tales of Dogman executing his plan of scaring our entire nation. If you would like to inspire doggerel poetry just like that and join the annals of the greats like Valerie Gomez aka Nicole Gomez, then you too can donate to us using either our PayPal link in the video info or by doing what Valerie Gomez aka Nicole Gomez did and clicking that thanks button located under each of our videos here on YouTube. There are other ways you can help us stay online in these inflationary times, and even cool perks you can get in return, like secret episodes. The drive-in will never die, as the star of a different streaming service often says, but the drive-in will get freaky and weird, as is documented by researcher Preston Dennett in his 2020 book, and also by us in this next story, which we're gonna go ahead and call Our Drive-In Was Haunted by Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have childhood memories about the Dogman that I thought were dreams, until I mentioned them to my brother and sister during the pandemic, when we would have weekly Zoom calls. After some weeks of discussing our random memories, we had pieced together a narrative that was even wilder than what I had been remembering before then. The story is so bizarre, I really don't even want to believe it myself, but if my siblings and I are remembering actual events, then the Dogman phenomenon is in reality far more mysterious, interesting, and terrifying than any of us might have previously thought. I remember sitting in the back of my parents' Buick, watching the Dogman running around, taking people away, screaming. First, a big bright floodlight or spotlight came on to the right of the movie screen. Then the werewolves flooded in from every direction, like a military maneuver. I couldn't tell if there were a dozen of the dog-like manimals, or if I was seeing the same 4 or 5 over and over again. They looked that similar to each other. I remember thinking that they looked like the Island of Lost Souls, that old Bela Lugosi movie, but with better makeup. They had dog or wolf heads, but they stood up and they walked on these hairy, muscular humanoid bodies. It did not look like costuming, though. It looked like real savage wolf people were picking humans up on their shoulders and running away with them off into the darkness. It looked very, very real to my young self, and I traded seats with my brother so I could sit in the middle where I felt safer. I was watching all this from inside the car with my family. I remember my mother and father telling us to roll our windows up tight and make sure our doors were locked. They acted like this kind of thing happened all the time. When the upright walking werewolf-type Dogman attack, tell your kids to roll up the windows and then just turn on the air conditioning. My parents were so mesmerized by the movie, which I can't even remember the name of, that they just chomped on their popcorn and stared ahead. It was like how these days you can see a dimwit almost get run over by a bus, but they never look up from their phone. Maybe the drive-in was an early experimental version of a mind control device. No matter how zombified my parents were that night, my brother and sister and I were watching the insanity unfolding outside the car. Women and children being dragged and carried off, men getting throttled and left unconscious amid the trampling, screeching mobs. My sister, in the middle of all of this, asked my parents for soda, and my father yelled at her that she could wait for the werewolf attack to end if she really wanted soda. Both parents mumbled about their ungrateful, spoiled brats for a while, and the mayhem continued outside, unabated. I remember a Zoom call in which my sister told me and my brother last year, or maybe at the beginning of this year, about a book she had read where people claimed they saw UFOs at movie drive-in shows. All of these memories sprang up in my mind, and I told them some of the things I just told you about those creatures that look like werewolves, how they abducted a large part of the audience, how our parents just sat there watching the movie instead of either doing something to help or getting their family out of there to safety. I expected both my brother and sister to roar with laughter, but not only did they not think that what I was saying was funny or strange, they each added in details that I either didn't know or somehow had forgotten about that event. Apparently, this sort of thing happened during multiple showings, for one thing. Not every, but most times that our family went to the drive-in to see a double feature, there would be, according to my brother and sister, a flying saucer-shaped UFO that would fly down from up in the sky, take a position next to the movie screen, and then put on its own show. The werewolves, the Dogman that I remembered, only happened once, according to them, but the UFO was a fairly consistent attendee, and we never told anyone about it when it would happen. We all weirdly felt that it was just not something to talk about. How strange was that? I want to say that I still to this day do not remember any of this UFO stuff. I still have no personal visual memory of seeing anything strange other than the dog-headed hairy monster men who were snatching people up and running off with them over their shoulders. I'm still not even certain where those dogmen ran off to. It seemed like they were carrying their prey, kicking and screaming, off into the woods that surrounded the old outdoor theater. Update. After further conversation with my siblings while editing this, we have all come to the conclusion that the bright spotlight I remember seeing flash on to the right of the movie screen during the werewolf or dogman riot must have been the same thing that they perceived as a UFO. I remember seeing this bright light coming on, and then I saw the hairy dog-headed men come running out. I thought the bright light being on signaled that this was some kind of a publicity event, that the dog-headed men were really guys in costumes there to publicize some movie. Now, neither my brother nor my sister saw the bright spotlight that I saw. They saw a spinning, shining UFO disc floating in the sky to the right of the movie screen. To me, this raises another set of questions. Which of us was seeing something closer to reality? Were we seeing a visitation from another world? Or from future people? Were we seeing a staged event? Or possibly a psyops experiment? Did we really see what we thought we were seeing? We couldn't have been if we each saw different things. Were there actual dog-headed men picking up women and children and carrying them off? Or were those women, children, and dogmen all actors hired by someone to put on a show for some reason? Well, this drive-in closed down some time ago, but a bunch of young guys from another part of the country are thinking of coming in here and refitting the place to run double features in the 21st century. And I do admit that part of me is quite excited about this idea, but another part of me is terrified that it might bring back the werewolf attacks. I mean, I've never heard of any werewolf or dogman encounters in this region during the years when that drive-in's been closed down. Come to think of it, there was no press about the attacks back when they were happening. It's almost like we were all told to forget about it. No, that's not it exactly, because we all remembered parts of the phenomenon. I think it was suggested to us that this was something that was just not important to remember, or maybe something the memory of which should be de-emphasized and considered less important. Seeing a UFO hovering over a drive-in as my siblings had, while a small army of dog-headed men kidnapped and ran off with humans, well, that should have been the story of our lifetimes, it seems to me. Yet we all had pushed it so far to the backs of our minds that we almost didn't pull the memories out again at all. And if we just lived with this silently, how many others who were also there that night just got up the next morning and acted like none of this ever happened? And if whoever did this could get away with it once, what would have stopped them from doing this over and over? And what would have stopped them from doing this at multiple outdoor theaters all over the USA and the world? I mean, it's a scary story, I think, but the implications of it are far more frightening still. How many of us have been to haunted places like that old drive-in multiple times, but never came away realizing that we had just experienced something extremely out of the ordinary, or at least came away suppressing part of the memory of the event. The one single thing that pulled my family out of our haze about this was that my sister discovered a book by an author named Preston Dennett called UFOs at the Drive-In, 100 True Cases of Close Encounters at Drive-In Theaters. We only found out about this book about 4 or 5 months ago, maybe 6, but our memories came rushing back. We are contemplating writing to Preston Dennett, although the UFO part would be more my sister and brother's tale to tell than mine. We've agreed, at least for now, to keep all this anonymous and not name the theater either. We're not young anymore, but we all still need to work and can't afford to get labeled crazy. Maybe if we live on into retirement and have nothing to lose, then we might change our minds, but it's not going to happen while there are hungry mouths to feed around here. At any rate, you should definitely check out this book. This researcher, Preston Dennett, went out there and found 100 different cases where people claim that UFOs came down from the sky and did various weird things while movies were projected on screen at drive-ins. Sometimes they would fly behind the screen as if trying to figure out how this giant flat-screen TV worked. Sometimes a bunch of them would appear and dance around in a hypnotic way. Sometimes it appeared that there was a mass abduction. Other times the flying saucer would sit in the air in the back as though watching the film. I don't know if anyone else got a werewolf attack though. I think the people in attendance that night with us in that drive-in, alongside my family, were the only ones who ever realized that. Our drive-in was haunted. By Dogman. He's a hero to old Hank and me, a giant in this channel's history. Of course you know I'm talking About him, he's Mr. Walker Godzilla Tim. You want to know why I'm awake and reading scary stories to you today? Because I had some food this morning, what you humans call breakfast. And you want to know what kind soul bought me said breakfast? Why, it was our friendly friend from Northern Ireland himself, Godzilla Tim Walker. He used our handy paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page to donate directly to our pet human slave that we have make these shows for us. And of course he spent the money getting me some blueberry oatmeal. Blueberries. You know, all Bigfoot love blueberries. In fact, we're known to kidnap humans that eat too many of our blueberries. Then we eat the humans. Never waste a blueberry, even one that's already been digested. They got the antioxidants, yo. And speaking of antioxidants, if you don't use PayPal, you can also donate to us right here on YouTube using our handy dandy little thanks button. It's like Super Chat for those of us who are fictional and animated, and therefore can't really do live streams. Well, this is the time of year when nature says we've had enough fun and starts lowering the temperature on us, whether we like it or not. It can be annoying and it can be expensive. I hope everyone who can hear my voice survives and thrives this winter, unless you happen to be the kind of dogman that's in this next story, which has the appropriate title of The Labor Day Dogman. Dear Scary Stories at NYC, I used to know a fairly well-off family that lived in a relatively exclusive beachside neighborhood in a nice part of Wisconsin. They once offered to pay me money to watch their house while they went away for a few days around Labor Day. This was before people rented their homes out online so easily. They would actually pay you money to live there for free, often buying you lots of food, too, if they had pets that you needed to care for. I only pet sit for a couple of people these days. I wouldn't want to be getting into it anymore. I'm old now. At any rate, this family was one that was quite generous and had a lovely home and very easy to care for pets. But I only ever watched their place once, and I can tell you why, by using one word. Dogman. Yeah, you might not have noticed I said this happened in Wisconsin, but maybe it makes more sense to you now. So it was the beginning of September, and I was recommended to the family by a friend of a friend of a friend of a cousin of an uncle of a friend of a coworker's friend, or something like that. They told my friend that each year the person they hire seemed to do a fine job, but then they all refused to come back a second time, and they won't explain why. So this family were desperate to get anyone to look out for their place, and I couldn't figure it out. They were providing multiple freezers full of food in their basement, and higher than normal daily pay rate as well. They had a 56K modem connection to the internet on its own separate phone line, which was like a real luxury in the 1990s. So why did nobody want to watch their house 2 years in a row? I had a feeling I would regret taking this gig, but I had to check it out. When I went all the way out to the house, I was sort of expecting to see some kind of haunted-looking place, but no, it was beautiful. It was a lovely neighborhood, surrounded by thick woods, all ending in a really nice beach. I don't know if all the other neighbors were out of town, but I never saw anyone else on the water or behind the home for the entire time I was out there. The homeowners were very open and walked me through where everything was and what to do in case of different types of emergencies. They seemed very straightforward and I liked them. The kids seemed respectful, which is all a visiting adult can really ask. I thought we had all opened clear lines of communication with each other. I understood the regimens of each person's separate pets, and it was time for the family to go have fun. The parents looked more worried than anything else, though, and they took me aside before leaving. Conspiratorially, they slipped me $200 in cash on top of my agreed-upon pay, and they looked me in the eye, both of them. Then they begged me that if I chose to quit like the others, that I would at least explain to them why, so that they might have a chance to fix whatever it was for the future. I guess that extra money was for me telling them the truth about why I was about to quit. They were that certain that I was never going to return to their home that they handed me $200 just to promise to tell them why. I mean, I was glad to have the money, but I was absolutely creeped out about the reason that I had it. What the heck was going to happen while that family was gone? My first night in the house, I heard thumping sounds coming from different directions. I had interpreted these noises as coming from other rooms inside, and so I spent the night getting up out of bed and looking around to make certain that I was the only human being there. I wondered if there were people around who would make break-ins, or if there might be ghosts in the house, which had scared off the previous house sitters. On my second night, I was up investigating mysterious thumps in the house again, when a rock flew straight through a second-story window, crashing through the glass and shattering it in all directions. I looked out the window into the night, and I saw nothing but darkness. Bending down to pick up the small rock, I was surprised to find it extremely hot, which caused me to immediately drop it and run into the bathroom to run my fingertips under cold water for a while. When I got back to it later, the rock was only a bit warm, but it had left a slight surface burn on the room rug, and left a bit of a stench of burning rug in the air as I cleaned up the glass and covered the window over with cardboard and tape that I found in the room. So by the third night, I no longer felt the house was haunted. I felt there was someone throwing rocks at the house at night instead, and I wanted to know who. I found the highest powered flashlight in the house, and that night, when the thumping sounds usually started, I was downstairs sitting on the steps out back, with that big old flashlight on my lap, and I was just waiting to hear anything go thump. Well, I heard some thumping that night. First I heard it all the way on the other side of the house, so I got up and walked around over there. When I got to that side, I heard another thump from the area I had started in. I just kept walking circles until I heard a thump on the house right near me. Turning quickly, I shone my flashlight right on a really big, upright animal, like a big dog standing on its hind legs. I saw fangs, and I saw flashing eyes, and I saw dog paws larger than my hands, and I saw all of this happening at my eye level and above. I'm 6 feet, and have been since a fairly young age. That animal-looking thing with the fangs and the flashing eyes and the giant paws with long Wolverine claws sticking out was taller than I was by a long shot. I got all that info into my brain in a second or two, and then the Beastman bolted away from the light I was shining on it. Buoyed by the notion that that thing was frightened of my light, I got a burst of energy, and I bolted myself. But my desperate run was back toward the house. I don't really remember the face of the creature from that incident, but I remember emailing the couple that there was a dog-headed Bigfoot in their backyard that night. I remember specifically calling it a dog-headed Bigfoot. I only really can visualize remembering seeing the fangs, but since I wrote to the couple that it had a dog head, clearly I had to have seen on that first night that it did have a dog head. You know, it's strange though, because I remember the shock of seeing it the next night, which is the night I first remember consciously realizing that it was a dog-headed bipedal monster. That sighting, the second one, happened from inside the house. When I would go upstairs to sleep, that was when the thumping of the house would start. Since by then I had been losing some sleep, I fell asleep on the couch on the ground floor that night, watching something on the family's cable. I woke up disoriented and turned the TV off with the remote. I could still hear this sound that I didn't think I should be hearing. With my head down on the pillow, it seemed like sort of a machine sound, almost like a coffee pot gurgling maybe. When I lifted my head off the pillow though, then it sounded almost like growling. Sitting up and looking outside, I could see a dog hiding itself behind the bush out there. Its pupils were so dilated that its eyes reflected back every bit of ambient light in the universe at me. Its ears were back, but I thought I was seeing an oversized Doberman pinscher. Then that Doberman head, the large one bearing its huge fangs at me, the one holding its ears back in complete fury, The one growling at me, too. Well, it stood up to its full height, and I realized that this was the Dogman. This was the dog-headed Bigfoot I had been emailing the homeowners about. I jumped off the couch, looking around for my knapsack where I had my camera. Remembering it was upstairs, I ran to the staircase, tripping and falling. And then I remembered the family's VHS video camera up on the second shelf of the downstairs hall closet. Running and grabbing that, I ran back to the window where I'd seen the Doberman Pinscher Dogman outside. But I found that the creature, along with his growl, had moved on to go bother some other house sitter. I'm pretty certain that the family got back the next day, and as open as they had been when they were leaving, that's how closed off they were now when they got back. They really didn't seem to have responded well to me telling them that there was a Bigfoot with a dog head on their property, scaring off their house sitters. In fact, they told me in no uncertain terms that Bigfoot does not exist, Bigfoot does not have a dog head, and nothing that I described was ever on their property. If it had been there, they would have seen it themselves because they lived there. I did not. They were extremely unhappy with me, and I felt kind of like I just wanted to go. So I was really surprised when I got a call the following September to see if I wanted to go out and house sit the Dogman house again. I had already booked my time that year and I couldn't do it. But we made loose plans that I would do it the following year when I would set up cameras and try to get a video of the Dogman. Like that was going to be my entire plan that following year. But then you know what? The son in the family told his parents that he saw a werewolf in the backyard the following summer, and they moved out so quickly you'd have thought the house was on fire. Up till that point, my theory had been that the Dogmen were only in that area for September. That must have been the time of year where they migrated through, that's what I was thinking. Since the family was usually somewhere else in September, it was only the house sitters who were getting bothered by the mischievous Dogman. But if the kids saw one of them in the summer, then maybe the Dogman lived in the region more of the year than I had thought. Maybe it's just that they only throw rocks at your house in September, I don't know. But I never had a chance to get out there ever again, and consequently I never got any video of the Labor Day Dogman. Well, we can't thank you all enough. So many new members, picking one is tough. Promise we'll thank you all eventually. Today we'll thank one of our donors, you see. CS just donated us some bones, which I promptly used on new headphones. The last ones broke when I wore them to bed and crushed them under my Bigfoot head. So if the sound was decent and it wasn't a mess, it was because CS bought me over the years. We all owe a big thanks to CS who supported us low these so many years. Thank you, CS, and thank you to everyone else who's donated and become a member in the last week. I promise we will thank each of you with your own episode. You know, not many people are aware of this next health problem, and that's partially because not many people are aware of the Dogman. But the person who sent this next one in is, and that would explain why it's called My Friend is Allergic to Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. So, I have a Dogman pandemic story, by which I mean it took place back then. My friend Vito from college had for some reason decided that he was gonna come visit me for an extended period, uninvited, even though he's sort of a germ-phobic kinda guy. I mean, he was like that before everyone was being urged to be by the overlords. So, he got even more panicky once the insanity was fully underway. He was on the verge of what I would call being morbidly obese at the time, and he had some other health problems I can't remember the long names of, too. So I was surprised to hear that Vito was even traveling to the supermarket down the end of his block, let alone to my private home in a different state, where I was planning on spending the pandemic in private with my girlfriend, who has since become my wife, no thanks to Vito. But since my college buddy had been living in a shared apartment in a large building, he felt that his health would benefit from coming to stay with me and Dee here in the country outside of Harrisburg in PA. We still live in the same place, so I don't want to get too detailed about the location, but there's a lot of nature around us. I mean that both in terms of our own, mostly undeveloped property, as well as the 2 official natural areas maintained by the government and some scientists that are right nearby. Pennsylvania is a very beautiful state, and part of the reason for that is because of how many of the decisions around here are still left up to nature to decide. Of course, besides having a tendency to often create great transcendent beauty, nature also has a tendency to be very strange and even sinister. For every rose she gives us to smell is a bee ready to sting our nose. For every beautiful doe or a cute rabbit, there's a hungry mountain lion or a feral dogman. Yes, I did say dogman, and I meant it in the bad way, not in the children's book way. I know that the dogman is not supposed to officially exist, but since my friend Vito has a bad allergy to it, he and I would both like to disagree with the mainstream on this issue. I know I'm giving this to a channel which has educated listeners who already know a lot about the Dogman, but I feel like I should be more specific in describing exactly what I mean in this case. The word can have a lot of meanings, or at least a number of interpretations. For instance, the most famous Dogman film hoax was the Gable film, and in that the Dogman runs on 4 legs. He does not walk upright on 2. What I saw, and what Vito developed a sinus condition after exposure to, was more like a human being than the Dogman in that old Gable film. From a distance, it really did look like a human being in a costume. Up close, it became clear that this was an animal, without any humanity whatsoever. So Vito took what used to be Dee's personal office, and she moved up to a smaller room on the 2nd floor that we had set up as our guest bedroom. It seemed better to let Vito have the downstairs and for us to have the upstairs, since back then we really didn't know what to expect from the flu, the way the press was talking about it. So that first night that Vito was over, Dee was having trouble sleeping. At some point right in the middle of the night, she woke me up frantically but quietly, asking me to come to the window and look outside. She had one of our 2nd-story windows open as far as it would go, including the screen. I got panicked that our cat or dog would jump outside, but then I saw that Dee had closed our bedroom door before opening the window. I walked to within a few feet of that opening, feeling the breeze on me, and I gazed outside, not noticing anything out of the ordinary. Dee grabbed me and nearly threw me out the window, forcing me to stick my head out into the night and look directly downward. What I saw caused me to bang the back of my head as I drew myself back inside. It was either a fully realized, camera-ready werewolf costume for a decent budgeted horror film, or possibly it could have been an actual Pennsylvania werewolf looking in the window downstairs that my college friend Vito was sleeping just beyond. A cold breeze blew through the window upstairs, giving me a chill all over, and I heard Vito sneeze downstairs. It was really like my body lost all its temperature as I shivered all over. Throwing on my bathrobe and running downstairs, I wanted to make sure my friend was all right. Imagine if he had come out to the country looking to escape being done in by something too tiny to see, and ended up getting finished off by a predator as large as this canine man thing. Looked as though it might be from up on the 2nd floor. When I reached Vito's room, he was out of bed, still sneezing uncontrollably. One sneeze after another came, as he barely had time to inhale a breath between each of them. Finally he choked and began coughing, while the regular repeating sneezes interrupted some of the coughs, thereby causing more coughing. The poor guy fell to his knees, choking, and for the first time, I saw what was standing just outside his window, staring in. It was a 7 or 8 foot tall steroid freak of a canine. Although there was hair or fur in strategic locations, this appeared to mainly be a bald wolf or a dog, possibly I thought one with mange. It was so muscular, however, that I have to say it certainly didn't look or appear to be ill. In fact, this creature seemed to be enjoying the situation, seemed to be making my poor buddy Vito ill on purpose. I behaved irrationally, which normally in my life I'm later forced to apologize for, and then I got castigated by my girlfriend and her mother for weeks and weeks and months, up until the next time I say something incorrect and I'm ordered to apologize all over again. In this case, though, it turned out that my irrational behavior was the best thing to do. I ran around my choking chum, and I ran at that window, yelling at the Dogman in my deepest deep voice, which I guess was not really that deep. I just sort of charged toward the window, like I was Mel Gibson in the movie Braveheart, not having any plan at all as to what I would do if I got there and the Dogman called my bluff. Fortunately for me, he instinctively backed off, darting away with such speed and grace that again, I don't see how he could have possibly had mange or any other major affliction. I just think he was a rare subspecies of the upright walking dogman, as it is found here in mysterious Pennsylvania, the state I love. Once the beast man was out of range, then Vito was able to finish coughing and catch his breath. We didn't realize it at first, but when that dogman had moved away, Vito had stopped sneezing. In other words, Vito was allergic to the Pennsylvania Dogman. So my wife got her old office back, Vito got to sleep upstairs in her intermediate office, and none of us were brave enough to sleep on the ground floor again for the remainder of the time that we shared the place. You know, it's funny, Dee and I moved out after a while for personal family reasons, but when we went back to live in that place near Harrisburg, Vito had a sneeze attack. It was actually as we were packing a camper to drive him to the next place he was going to be crashing that he had the sneezing attack. Neither Dee nor I made any mental connection when it was happening. Vito is sneezing again. Vito is allergic to Dogman. So maybe if Vito is sneezing, then Dogman might be around. We were so intent on getting him packed up so that we could have our home back for ourselves, no offense Vito if you're listening to this, that we sort of just let the guy sneeze and sneeze, and we blamed it on the dust from Vito's room. But then, I saw the poor guy looking scared and pointing up at something behind me. Turning around, for just 1 second, I saw it. There wasn't enough time for me to let Dee know, but thanks to Vito, I got to witness an actual Pennsylvania Dogman from maybe 7 feet away. Well, 7 feet in front of me, and then a couple or 3 feet above me, if you know what I mean. The glowing eyes met mine, and its face looked disgusted. It certainly wasn't scared of me, but it was really unhappy that I was there, and that was enough to get it to break eye contact and leave. I do want to say that this dogman had ears on top of his head, and that he held his clawed paws together in front of him, not at his sides like a man would. It reminded me a bit of an immense rodent in that sense. The ears were a slight bit long for a wolf's ears as well, which also made me think that it was possibly a feral giant rabbit that walked upright. But this thing didn't hop. It marched. It stamped along like Godzilla. Boom, 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 receding into the forest in the distance. Vito stopped sneezing, and Dee, who had not actually seen the dogman, made a joke that The Dogman must have gone away, Vito. We both told her what you already know. And the three of us were pretty amazed, believe me. And also, we packed Vito up to go even faster. So I think I already mentioned that we haven't had any Dogman issues since we've moved back into the place. Of course, that could partially be because we just sort of forgot about the creature while we were away dealing with those family issues. I mean, I hope the Dogman is part of our past, but I could send this email off to you, look out the window, and then see those glowing, terrifying, inhuman eyes glaring right back in at me. For all I know, the Dogman has been here all the time and never left. I suppose we'll never really know, unless it decides to reveal itself to us once again. Another option would be to invite old Vito back out to the home. If he starts sneezing like crazy, then we'll know that the Dogman never really left. And we would know that because my friend is allergic to Dogman. Ladies, are you having trouble getting people to respect your right of way while jogging? Perhaps your sports bra just isn't vicious enough. Try wearing this new vicious Dogman sports bra and watch all the pedestrians rush to get out of your way while you jog. You'll be queen of the road in your all new vicious Dogman sports bra, the link to which is in the description of this very video. Use discount code SEPT2022 in order to get 20% discount of your purchase between now and October 1st. We'd like to thank Zechariah Kittle, and I mean a lot, I do not mean a little. Please join us in thanking Zechariah Kittle for rejoining our channel membership club. Did you know that you can become a channel member and then get to see extra secret episodes? And if you join at the level Zechariah's joined on, you also get to see our over 25 hours of secret archive Dogman episodes too. Well, it's true. And now here's international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman to fill in the rest of the deeds. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.